Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
You're nothing. Don't act like you matter. My wife once said, honestly, we forget you exist half the time. My daughter chimed in, and that's when I tapped my fork against my glass. This won't take long. Just 3 sentences. By the second one, my wife's face drained of color. Dorian Collins stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, tracing the silver strands weaving through his once jet-black hair. At 47, he'd kept his athletic frame through disciplined morning workouts that his family never noticed. 23 years of marriage, a grand Tudor home in Westlake, and 2 children who had become strangers. This was the life he had built brick by painstaking brick. Dorian splashed cold water on his face, his mind wandering back to the whispered phone call he'd overheard Valeria having the night before. His wife of over 2 decades had giggled like a schoolgirl, lowering her voice to a whisper every time footsteps neared. He wasn't supposed to be home, yet his flight from Phoenix had come in early, and he'd wanted to surprise her. Who disturbs the queen at this hour? He had joked, entering their bedroom. Valeria had nearly dropped her phone. Jesus, Dorian, you scared me half to death. I thought you weren't coming home until tomorrow. I thought I'd surprise you. He'd replied, noting how quickly she ended the call. Now, as he adjusted his tie a deep burgundy silk against a crisp white shirt, Dorian wondered when exactly he had become invisible to his own family. He had built Collins' defense systems from the ground up, securing government contracts that made them wealthier than they had ever imagined. Yet to Valeria and their daughter Nina, he was just the family ATM, the boring provider who barely existed in their glamorous lives. Their son Parker was different. At West Point, following in his father's footsteps despite Valeria's protests. At least someone in this family still saw him. Dorian descended the grand staircase, his hand brushing the polished oak banister. The house was quiet except for the clinking of dishes in the kitchen, where Rosa, their housekeeper, prepared breakfast. The walls were adorned with family photos, smiling faces that told a story of perfect happiness. Dorian knew better now. Good morning, Mr. Collins. Rosa greeted him warmly. Coffee's ready. Thank you, Rosa. Is Mrs. Collins awake yet? No, sir. She came in very late last night. Dorian nodded, adding cream to his coffee. And Nina? He asked. Miss Nina said she'll be down shortly. Dorian carried his coffee to his study, the one room in the house that was truly his. Behind his mahogany desk, he unlocked the bottom drawer and retrieved a small black notebook. Inside were dates, times, suspicious calls, late nights, a pattern emerging over the last 3 months. He wasn't a military intelligence veteran for nothing. Observation had always been his specialty. His phone buzzed with a text from his old army buddy, Thea Washington. Results are in. Call me. Dorian closed the notebook and gazed out the window at the manicured lawn. Whatever Thea had found, it would have to wait. Today was Valeria's birthday dinner, and he had promised to be there physically and mentally. 25 years together deserved at least that much. When Dorian entered the dining room that evening, Valeria was already 3 glasses deep into a bottle of Chateau Margaux. Her auburn hair was styled perfectly, and her black dress clung to the curves she maintained through a strict Pilates routine and the skilled hands of her plastic surgeon. There he is, she said, raising her glass. The man who remembers my birthday only because his secretary puts it on his calendar. Nina snickered beside her mother. At 21, she was Valeria's mini-me in both looks and attitude, beautiful, entitled, and growing increasingly cold toward her father. Dorian recalled the moment calmly as he took his seat at the head of the table. I even picked out your gift myself. Miracles do happen. Valeria slurred slightly, her words laced with alcohol. Though I doubt it'll be as nice as what Blake got me. Dorian paused, his fork midway to his mouth. Blake, Mom's interior designer? Nina interjected, exchanging a knowing glance with her mother. He has amazing taste. I wasn't aware we were redecorating again, Dorian said, carefully setting his fork down. There's a lot you're not aware of, Dad, Nina shot back with a smirk. Dorian studied his daughter, sensing something different in her expression, something beyond her usual disdain, closer to pity. She knew something. The realization hit him like a physical blow. How's the Carson project coming along? Valeria asked, clearly trying to change the subject. Will you be disappearing to Washington again next week? No, Dorian replied, his mind racing. I've decided to be more present for a while. Valeria's smile faltered. Oh, that's unexpected. I'm full of surprises, Dorian said, raising his water glass in a mock toast to new beginnings. Later that night, while Valeria slept off her wine, Dorian called Tobin from his study. Tell me, he said, getting straight to the point. It's Blake Hamilton, Tobin's gravelly voice confirmed. Interior designer by day, your wife's lover by night. Going on 7 months now, not 3. Dorian closed his eyes. There's more, Tobin continued. Your daughter knows. She's known from the start. She's been covering for her mother, running interference when you're around. Dorian felt his chest tighten. Financial connections, that's where it gets interesting, Tobin added. Valeria's been moving your money into separate accounts. Small amounts at first, but recently, totals just shy of $2 million. And Blake? Dorian asked, his voice tight. He's got a history, Tobin said. 3 previous relationships with wealthy married women, all ending with him significantly richer. He's a professional, Dorian. Dorian thanked his friend and ended the call. He stared at the family portrait on his desk, taken on their 20th anniversary trip to Bora Bora. Valeria's smile, once the light of his world, now seemed calculating. Nina's arm around his shoulder felt like a betrayal. He opened his safe and removed a USB drive, powering up his laptop. The security feed from their home, installed after a break-in 2 years ago, revealed everything he needed to see. Blake Hamilton entering their home while Dorian was away. Valeria laughing, kissing him in the foyer. Nina welcoming him complicit in the deception. And then, Blake and Valeria in Dorian's study, opening his safe, photographing documents related to Colin's defense. Industrial espionage wrapped in a torrid affair. Dorian shut the laptop and leaned back in his chair. The pain was there, but it felt distant. Instead, a cold, tactical clarity took over the same mindset that had kept him alive behind enemy lines years ago. They had made a critical mistake. They had underestimated him, mistaking his silence for weakness, his devotion for blindness. As he stared at the ceiling, Dorian Collins began to formulate a plan. The autumn charity gala at the Westlake Country Club was in full swing when Dorian arrived fashionably late and alone. Valeria had gone ahead, claiming she needed to help with last-minute arrangements as the committee chairwoman. Dorian knew the real reason. She wanted time with Blake, who had volunteered his services to design the event. Dorian adjusted the cuffs of his tuxedo and surveyed the room. His entrance caused a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Executives from competing defense firms nodded in his direction. Politicians working the room paused their conversations. Despite Valeria's dismissal of his importance, Dorian Collins commanded respect in the circles that mattered. "There's the man himself," called out Senator Phillips, approaching with a champagne flute. "I was just telling the secretary about your new drone defense system, revolutionary stuff." Dorian smiled politely, shaking hands and making small talk, all the while keeping his eyes on Valeria across the room. She was radiant in an emerald gown, laughing with Blake Hamilton, whose hand lingered just a little too intimately at the small of her back. "Dorian, you made it," Valeria said, feigning surprise and poorly masking her delight. "You know Blake, of course?" Blake extended his hand, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Mr. Collins, a pleasure as always." "Blake," Dorian replied, gripping the man's hand firmly. "Beautiful work with the decorations. You have quite the touch with my wife's projects." Blake's smile faltered for a moment. "Valeria has exquisite taste. Makes my job easy. She's always known exactly what she wants." Dorian held Blake's gaze until the younger man looked away. Across the room, Nina entered with her boyfriend, Tristan Davenport, the son of Richard Davenport, Dorian's chief competitor in the defense industry. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. "Dad," Nina said coolly as they approached. "I didn't think you'd come, and miss seeing my family in their element." "Never." Dorian kissed her cheek, noting how she stiffened. "Mr. Collins," Tristan greeted him nervously. "Sir," Tristan added. "Tristan," Dorian replied. "How's your father? Still recovering from losing the Patterson contract?" Tristan's face tightened. He's well, sir. Give him my regards," Dorian said before turning back to Valeria. "Darling, would you dance with your husband for appearance's sake, if nothing else?" On the dance floor, Dorian held Valeria close, feeling the stiffness in her body as she reluctantly complied. "You're in rare form tonight," she muttered. "What's gotten into you?" "Clarity," he replied simply. "It's quite illuminating." Valeria missed a step. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means I've been asleep for a long time," Dorian said in a low voice. "But I'm wide awake now." Later that evening, Dorian slipped away to a private meeting room where Tobin was waiting with a portfolio. "Blake Hamilton, born Brian Hensley," Tobin began, spreading photographs across the table. "Changed his name after a fraud conviction in his 20s. Specializes in getting close to wealthy women, particularly those married to men with valuable intellectual property." Dorian studied the surveillance photos, recognizing Blake meeting with a man who was an agent of a Chinese technology firm. "He's selling my designs through Tristan Davenport," Tobin confirmed. "The kid's in debt, mostly gambling. Blake approached him 6 months ago. Tristan feeds the intel to his father, who passes it along for a hefty fee." Dorian's jaw tightened. "And my daughter doesn't know about the espionage," Tobin added. "As far as I can tell, she just thinks her mother's having a fling and she's helping keep you in the dark." She and Tristan had started dating shortly after Blake entered the picture, probably not a coincidence. Dorian nodded, his face expressionless. And the accounts? He asked. Valeria set up offshore accounts, but they're traceable, Tobin said. She's planning to leave soon. Tickets to Geneva next month for her and Blake one way. What about Parker? Has she contacted him? Dorian asked. No, Tobin replied. Your son seems completely in the dark. Dorian gathered the photos and documents, slipping them into his briefcase. Thank you, Tobin. I'll need one more favor. Name it. I need Parker home next weekend for a family emergency. Make it happen through official channels. Tobin raised an eyebrow. You're not planning anything stupid, are you? Dorian smiled thinly. On the contrary, I'm planning something very, very smart. Back at the gala, Dorian rejoined the party, playing the role of the devoted husband flawlessly. He laughed at the right moments, complimented Valeria publicly, and even raised a toast to her successful event, all the while cataloging faces who knew about the affair, who was complicit in the betrayal, and who simply looked at him with pity. As they drove home in silence, Valeria finally spoke. You're different tonight. Am I? Yes. Attentive. Present. She studied his profile in the darkness of the car. It's unsettling. Dorian chuckled. I've decided to take an interest in what matters to you. Valeria, isn't that what you've always wanted? She turned to look out the window. It's a little late for that, don't you think? It's never too late to wake up to what's happening right under your nose, he replied. The following week, Dorian methodically set his plan in motion. He met with his lawyer and updated his will. He transferred funds into secure accounts that only he could access. He contacted trusted colleagues at the Pentagon about security concerns. Each move was calculated, precise, and invisible to his wife and daughter. On Friday, he picked up Parker from the airport himself. Dad, what's going on? His son asked as they drove. My company said it was a family emergency, but you look fine. It is an emergency, just not a medical one, Dorian replied. I need you to trust me, son. Things at home are not what they seem. Parker studied his father's face. Is it Mom? Dorian nodded silently. I could tell something was wrong the last time I visited, Parker said. She barely talked about you, and Nina was acting weird. He paused. Is Mom seeing someone else? Dorian tightened his grip. It's not that simple. I'll explain everything later, but tonight, just trust me. Whatever happens, stick with me. I've got a plan. That evening, Dorian arranged for a special family dinner. Valeria, Nina, Parker, and himself. He had Rosa prepare Valeria's favorite meal and uncork a bottle of rare wine from their cellar. What's the occasion? Valeria asked suspiciously as they gathered at the table. Can a man have dinner with his family? Dorian replied pleasantly. Parker's home for the weekend. I thought we should celebrate. Nina kept checking her phone beneath the table, clearly uncomfortable with her brother's presence. Parker watched the dynamics unfold, saying little, observing everything. As Rosa served the main course, Dorian noticed Valeria texting discreetly. Probably Blake, wondering why she wasn't available tonight. Dorian said dryly. So, Parker, he continued. How's West Point treating you? It's challenging, but good, Parker replied. My tactical planning instructor says I have your instincts. Dorian smiled genuinely. High praise. Please, Nina muttered. Like we need another military robot in the family. Nina, Valeria warned, though her heart wasn't fully in it. What? Nina shot back. We all know Dad cares more about his precious defense contracts than his actual family. Dorian took a sip of wine, unperturbed. Is that what you think? It's what we all think, she said defiantly. You're never here. And when you are, you're locked in your study or taking calls. You're a nobody, Dorian. Don't pretend you matter. The table fell silent. Valeria looked uncomfortable, but didn't contradict her daughter. Honestly, we forget you exist half the time, Nina added cruelly. Dorian nodded slowly, as though processing a business proposal that required careful consideration. Then he clinked his fork against his glass, the crystal sound cutting through the tension. This won't take long. Just 3 sentences, he said calmly. I know about Blake Hamilton, the offshore accounts, and the industrial espionage. By the second sentence, Valeria's face had gone pale, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. By the third, Nina's phone slipped from her fingers, clattering onto her plate. Parker looked between them, understanding dawning on his face. Dorian folded his napkin precisely and placed it beside his plate. Parker, would you join me in my study? Valeria, Nina, I suggest you don't make any calls or leave the house. The FBI will be here in the morning, and they'll have questions about your involvement in selling classified military technology to foreign interests. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight as Dorian poured 2 fingers of scotch for himself. Parker sat across from him in the study, the family photos on the walls seeming to watch them with new eyes. How long have you known? Parker asked, his voice steady despite the shock. Suspected for months, Dorian replied. swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Confirmed last week. Your mother and Blake Hamilton have been selling my weapons designs to competitors and foreign entities. Tristan Davenport was their pipeline to his father's company. Parker's jaw tightened, and Nina covered for Mom's affair. Though I don't think she knew about the espionage. She was manipulated. Tristan started dating her right after Blake approached him. Jesus, Parker muttered, running a hand through his short, military-cut hair. What happens now? Dorian leaned forward. Now, I dismantle everything they've built, piece by piece. The federal investigation is real. I've been working with the Defense Department for weeks. They'll arrest Blake and Richard Davenport tomorrow, but not your mother or sister. You're protecting them after everything they've done? No, Dorian said coldly. The federal charges will be too quick, too clean. What I have planned will be much more thorough. Upstairs, Valeria and Nina were panicking. Dorian had disabled the house phones and blocked cell service within the property, a security feature he'd installed years ago but never activated until tonight. He's bluffing, Nina insisted, pacing her mother's bedroom. Valeria wasn't so sure. The man she had seen at dinner wasn't the accommodating husband she'd manipulated for years. This was the Dorian Collins she had glimpsed only rarely, the strategic mind that had built a defense empire, the former special operations officer who spoke little of his military past. We need to get to Blake, she said, gathering essentials into a small bag. Warn him. How? Dad's locked down the house. The wine cellar connects to the storm tunnel that runs to the lake, Valeria explained. It was part of the original property, a Prohibition-era escape route. Dorian showed me years ago. They crept downstairs, careful to avoid the study where Dorian's voice could still be heard. In the kitchen, they found Rosa finishing up the evening's cleanup. Senora, Rosa said coolly, acknowledging Valeria's presence. She had been with the family for 15 years, and her loyalty to Dorian was unwavering. We're just getting some wine, Rosa, Valeria said, trying to sound casual. Of course, Senora, Rosa replied. Though Mr. Collins asked me to let him know if anyone entered the cellar tonight. Valeria froze. Did he now? And will you? Rosa met her gaze steadily. He has been good to me and my family, unlike others in this house. Nina stepped forward. How much to forget you saw us? Rosa's expression hardened. Some things cannot be bought, Miss Nina. This is one of them. Valeria grabbed her daughter's arm. It's fine. We'll find another way. But there was no other way. Every exit had been secured. Every method of communication blocked. As dawn approached, Valeria sat on her bed in defeat. The woman who had once schemed her escape with a lover was now trapped in a prison of her own design. At exactly 7 a.m., black SUVs pulled into the driveway. Dorian met the FBI agents at the door, Parker by his side. Mr. Collins, said Special Agent Diana Reeves. Everything as we discussed? Yes, Dorian confirmed. My wife and daughter are upstairs. They'll cooperate. The agents fanned out through the house. Valeria and Nina were brought down shortly after, stunned as the situation was explained. They were not being arrested yet, but would be required to surrender their passports and remain available for further questioning. Dorian, Valeria pleaded as he prepared to leave with Parker. You can't do this. 23 years of marriage must count for something. Dorian looked at her with cold detachment. It counted for nothing when you betrayed me. Valeria, why should it matter now? What about me? Nina cried, tears streaming down her face. I'm your daughter. Are you? Dorian asked quietly. Because daughters don't help destroy their fathers. You made your choice when you sided with your mother and her lover. As Dorian and Parker walked toward the car, Agent Reeves fell and stepped beside them. Blake Hamilton is in custody, she reported. So is Richard Davenport. The evidence was exactly where you said it would be. Tristan Davenport is cooperating. He's throwing everyone under the bus to save himself. Smart move having your son here last night. The kid's saying you masterminded the entire operation. Dorian gave a thin smile. Predictable. He'll find I've documented every interaction in detail. Reeves studied him. This isn't just about the espionage for you, is it? Everything I do serves multiple purposes, Agent Reeves. Dorian replied as he opened the car door. That's why I'm still alive. 3 weeks after the arrests, Dorian Collins vanished. His office reported he had taken a personal leave of absence. His lawyer informed Valeria that while household expenses would continue to be covered, all other funds were frozen pending the investigation's outcome. The media descended like vultures, feeding on the high-profile scandal of espionage in the defense sector. Valeria quickly became a pariah in the very social circles she once dominated. Friends, if they could be called that, abandoned her. The charity board requested her resignation. The country club politely suggested she might be more comfortable avoiding the premises during the investigation. Blake Hamilton, denied bail as a flight risk, sat in a federal detention center. His attorney sent increasingly desperate messages, pleading for Valeria's help. But the offshore accounts Dorian had mentioned were frozen. The money they'd counted on was unreachable. She realized it one night. Staring into her reflection, Dorian had planned everything. Every move, every consequence. He had wanted her isolated, and he had succeeded. Nina, caught up in her own fallout, was no longer a refuge. Tristan's cooperation with authorities had included turning over text messages that showed Nina had known about the affair in detail, making it impossible for her to feign ignorance. Her peers at university had distanced themselves. Her boyfriend was now working with the FBI, offering information about her family. And the man she had dismissed as a ghost in his own home had dismantled her social world with chilling precision. Parker had returned to West Point, leaving no room for ambiguity. "You and Nina made your bed," he told Valeria before departing. "Now you get to lie in it, but not with Blake." Only Rosa remained in the mansion with them, watching Valeria and Nina with quiet disapproval as they moved uneasily through rooms that now felt like a tomb. Every creak of the floorboards made them jump. Meanwhile, in a nondescript Virginia office building, Dorian sat across from Tobin Washington, reviewing a set of classified reports. Phase 1 is complete, Tobin confirmed. Valeria and Nina are isolated. Blake and the Davenports are looking at a minimum of 20 years. And the company's protected from the blowback. Dorian nodded, his expression calm. And the offshore accounts? Traced directly to Blake. His attorneys trying to claim Valeria was unaware of them. She knew, Dorian replied coldly. The signatures are hers. I have the originals. When do you plan to use them? When it'll do the most damage, Dorian said, standing to look out the window. What about Parker? Safe and focused, Tobin answered. His commanding officers shielding him from the media. Good. And my disappearance? Tobin smirked. Working like a charm. Rumors range from mental breakdown to defection to Russia. Dorian raised an eyebrow. Has Valeria hired anyone? Yeah. Private investigator. Frank Malone. Ex-cop. Divorced 3 times. Drinks too much. Takes cash for favorable reports. Perfect, Dorian murmured. Make sure he finds exactly what we want him to find. Across town, in a rundown bar, Frank Malone slid into a booth across from Valeria Collins. I've got something, he said, glancing around nervously. Your husband accessed a private account 2 days ago. Transferred $500,000 to an account in the Caymans. Valeria leaned forward. Can you trace it? Already did. Account belongs to a woman named Sophia Loren. French passport. Lives in Montreal. He slid a photo across the table. The woman in the picture was striking, dark-haired, elegant, at least 15 years younger than Valeria. In the photo, she and Dorian were entering a hotel, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. They've been meeting for at least 2 years, Malone added. Europe, Canada. Every time he traveled. Valeria stared at the image, her hand trembling. So while he was setting me up, he was sleeping with her? Malone shrugged. Rich men. Different set of rules. What Valeria didn't know was that Sophia Loren didn't exist, not really. She was an alias, a fabrication by Tobin Washington, a deep-cover operative from Dorian's military past. The photographs had been staged, the digital trail meticulously crafted. Back at the mansion, Nina pounced on the new information. This is perfect. If Dad had an affair too, it takes the heat off you. Makes you look less guilty. It's not that simple, Valeria replied, pouring another glass of wine. The espionage charges are what matter. Blake was selling Dorian's designs. And I helped him. Unknowingly, Nina insisted. You didn't realize what the documents were. Valeria gave her daughter a long, tired look. We both know that's not true. I knew exactly what I was giving Blake, Valeria admitted. Nina went quiet, the full weight of her mother's confession hitting her for the first time. Why, Mom? We had everything. Because your father always made me feel invisible, Valeria said bitterly. He built an empire and expected me to be grateful for the scraps of his attention. Blake made me feel seen. And the money? The offshore accounts? Nina asked. Valeria looked away. Insurance. I wanted freedom on my own terms. The following day, Valeria reached out to Blake's lawyer, hoping they could align their defense strategy. The reply was swift and devastating. Blake had taken a plea deal. In return for a reduced sentence, he had agreed to testify fully about Valeria's involvement in the espionage. He's claiming the entire operation was your idea, the lawyer said hesitantly. That you approached him specifically to gain access to your husband's classified work. That's a lie. Valeria gasped. He pursued me. Maybe, the lawyer said, grimacing. But he has emails and voice recordings that tell a different story. When the lawyer left, Valeria collapsed in tears. The man who had once promised her a new life had now betrayed her to save himself. That night, as she lay sleepless in bed, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. He knew from the beginning. Everything was part of his plan. SL. Sophia Loren. Dorian's mistress. Valeria sat up, heart pounding. She texted back. What plan? The reply came quickly. To destroy you completely. Blake was under surveillance from your first meeting. Dorian was building his case while you thought you were fooling him. Valeria felt the blood drain from her face. Why are you telling me this? She typed. Because he's doing the same to me now. Be careful. He's not finished with you yet. The texts, of course, had not come from Sophia, they were from Dorian himself. Another perfectly planted seed in his long game, sowing fear and paranoia. And he waited patiently for it to bloom. In Virginia, Dorian and Tobin were already reviewing the next phase. Blake's plea deal is locked in, Tobin confirmed. 10 years minimum. He's pinned everything on Valeria. As expected, Dorian said coolly. Loyalty was never one of his virtues. The Sophia texts are delivered. Valeria's unraveling. She'll be paranoid now, waiting for the next strike. Dorian didn't react. Then let's proceed. Release the financial records to the prosecutors. Every signature, every transfer, every conversation. And make sure copies reach Nina. Understood. She needs to see exactly who her mother really is. 2 days later, Nina sat in the library, sifting through the damning documents delivered by courier bank transfers, signed authorizations, transcripts of conversations. The truth laid bare. Her mother's betrayal wasn't just against Dorian, it had torn their entire family apart. When Valeria came home from her lawyer's office, pale and shaken, Nina was waiting. You said you loved him, she said, holding up the documents with trembling hands. You told me Dad ignored you. That Blake understood you. But it was never about love. It was about the money, wasn't it? Valeria's eyes widened as she took in the contents. Where did you get those? Dad sent them, Nina said, holding up the card. It read, the truth will set you free. You don't understand, Valeria started. I understand perfectly, Nina interrupted, voice cold. You used me. You made me complicit in everything. You knew I admired you, that I would have done anything to be like you, and you used that to turn me against him. It wasn't like that, Valeria said weakly. It was exactly like that, Nina shot back. And now Blake is saying it was all your idea. You're going to prison, Mom, and you've dragged me down with you. Valeria reached out, but Nina stepped away. Don't. Just don't. That night, Nina packed a bag and walked out of the mansion. She had nowhere to go. Her friends had deserted her. Parker wouldn't return her messages. And her father, well, he was off the grid. She checked into a cheap roadside motel, the kind of place the Nina Collins of a few months ago would never have considered. Sitting on the lumpy mattress, her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Hello? She answered hesitantly. Hello, Nina. Dorian's voice was calm, almost gentle. Tears sprang to her eyes. Dad, where are you? Somewhere safe. I was notified that you left the house. Of course he knew. He was still watching everything. I couldn't stay, she said. Not after everything I found out. And what did you find out? That Mom used me. That she never really cared about Blake. It was all about the money and getting back at you. Her voice cracked. And I helped her hurt you. There was a pause. Yes, you did. I'm sorry, she whispered. I was stupid and selfish and... Save your apologies, Dorian cut in. They mean nothing to me now. Nina winced at the coldness in his voice. What happens now? She asked, barely above a whisper. Your mother will be indicted for espionage. The evidence is overwhelming. As for you, he paused. That depends on the choices you make from this point on. Dad, please, I can't lose both of you. You should have thought of that before you chose sides, he replied. Then the line went dead. Nina sat in the silence, the full weight of her choices pressing down on her. 1 month after vanishing, Dorian Collins reemerged not at home, but at the headquarters of Collins Defense Systems. He walked into the executive boardroom where the directors were gathered in crisis, dressed impeccably and looking tanned, composed, and fully in control. Gentlemen, he said casually, I believe you were discussing my company. The board sat in stunned silence. Chairman Wilson was the first to recover. Dorian, where have you been? There's been chaos. I'm aware, Dorian interrupted, already sliding into the seat at the head of the table. I've been monitoring everything closely. He continued without missing a beat. The federal investigation has cleared Collins' defense of any corporate misconduct. My wife's actions and those of Blake Hamilton were their own, he added. Our security protocols worked exactly as intended, which is why the breach was detected and contained. The tension in the room eased visibly. Dorian had always been the visionary, the force that propelled the company. Without him, they'd been adrift. But this situation, he went on, revealed internal weaknesses, especially in those who were quick to distance themselves from me when the heat was on. A few board members shifted uneasily. Dorian opened a folder and distributed documents. This is a restructuring plan. Effective immediately. Those who showed loyalty will be rewarded. Those who didn't. He gave a thin, knowing smile. Well, the severance packages are generous. By day's end, 3 board members were ousted. Dorian had reasserted his authority and tightened his grip on the company. News of his return caused the company's plummeting stock to rebound almost overnight. Back at the mansion, Valeria received a hand-delivered envelope from Dorian's attorney. Inside, divorce papers and a proposed settlement. She could keep the house, but little else. Her access to the family's wealth would be completely severed. "This is insulting," she told her lawyer. "Mrs. Collins, given the circumstances and the criminal charges you're facing, this is actually quite generous," replied Phillips, a nervous man who kept adjusting his glasses. "Mr. Collins has indicated that he's willing to testify on your behalf if you accept these terms." "Testify about what?" "That you were manipulated by Blake Hamilton. That you didn't fully understand the implications of the documents you gave him." Valeria let out a bitter laugh. "He wants me to play the fool. To pretend I was some naive, clueless woman who didn't know what she was doing. It would significantly reduce your sentence," Phillips said carefully. "Otherwise, you're looking at 15 to 20 years. Valeria stared down at the documents in her lap, realizing the elegant trap Dorian had designed. If she accepted his offer, she would live in diminished comfort, but with her freedom. If she rejected it, she risked spending the rest of her life behind bars. "He always was a brilliant strategist," she murmured. Across town, Nina sat in a small apartment she had managed to rent with the last of her accessible funds. Her phone rang. "Parker. I heard Dad's back," he said without any preamble. "He is," Nina replied. "At the company. Not at home. Have you talked to him?" "Briefly. He's different. Colder." "I'm not surprised," Parker said. "You tried to apologize?" "I did. He wasn't interested." Parker sighed. "What did you expect? You betrayed him in the worst way." "I didn't know about the espionage, Parker. I swear." "Maybe not. But you knew Mom was cheating, and you helped her cover it up. You chose her." Nina shut her eyes, the truth hitting like a punch to the chest. "And now he's choosing too," she whispered. "He's cutting us off." "It's not about choosing sides anymore," Parker said. "It's about consequences. Dad always told us every choice comes with a price." When the call ended, Nina sat quietly, staring at her reflection in the window. The pampered princess was gone, replaced by someone forced to face reality. Her trust fund was frozen pending the investigation. Her credit cards were maxed out. The university had placed her on leave. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. But she recognized the style instantly. "Silver Spoon Diner. 7 p.m. Come alone. D." The Silver Spoon was a far cry from the upscale places Nina once frequented. She arrived at exactly 7 o'clock, scanning the booths until she saw him. Dorian Collins sat in the corner, sipping a coffee. "Sit," he said, not looking up. Nina slid into the booth, acutely aware of her wrinkled clothes and unwashed hair. "Thanks for meeting me." Dorian studied her. "You look terrible." "Appreciate it," she said with a flicker of her old sarcasm. "It's my new look, disgraced daughter chic." A faint smile ghosted across his face, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "Why did you want to meet?" she asked. "I didn't. You texted me." Nina pulled out her phone and handed it over. "You sure about that?" Dorian examined the screen, his eyes narrowing. "That's not from me." A chill ran through Nina. "Then who?" "Your mother," Dorian said, suddenly standing. "We need to leave. Now." But it was already too late. The diner door swung open and in walked Valeria, with a man close behind her. Nina didn't recognize the man with Valeria, but Dorian's posture shifted instantly, alert, coiled, dangerous. "Hello, Dorian," Valeria said with a brittle smile. "A family reunion." "Valeria," Dorian acknowledged coolly. "And you must be Frank Malone. Former detective, current private investigator, future inmate once your tampering with federal evidence comes to light." Malone's expression hardened. "You think you know everything, don't you, Collins?" "Not everything," Dorian replied evenly. "Just enough." He glanced at Nina. "Your mother used your phone to lure me here." "Clever, actually." "Mom." Nina turned to Valeria in confusion. "What is this?" "Your father's been playing all of us," Valeria snapped. "Pulling strings from the shadows, setting us up. But now it's my turn." Dorian sighed, almost looking bored. "And what exactly do you plan to accomplish with this little ambush?" "Justice," Valeria said sharply. "Mr. Malone has uncovered evidence of your affair with Sophia Lurin. Proof that you planned to leave me long before Blake. This entire espionage setup was your excuse to divorce me without paying what I deserve." Dorian's lips curled into a cold smile. "Sophia Lurin doesn't exist, Valeria. She's a fabrication. A test to see how you'd respond. And you responded exactly as I expected, desperate, reaching for anything that might save you." Valeria's confidence wavered. "You're lying. Mr. Malone has photographs." "Staged," Dorian interrupted. "With an operative who once worked under me in military intelligence." He turned to Malone. "Tell my wife what you found in the offshore accounts." "The truth." Malone shifted uncomfortably, glancing between them. He's been working for me the entire time," Dorian said calmly. Every discovery he brought to you was exactly what I wanted you to see. Valeria's face went pale. That's not possible. Everyone has a price, Dorian said simply. His was modest. Immunity for his own questionable activities and enough money to retire. Far less than what you try to take from me. Nina watched in stunned silence as the full extent of her father's manipulation came into focus. He hadn't just responded to betrayal, he had anticipated it, and controlled every step of the fallout. Why go through all of this? She asked. Why not just divorce Mom and walk away? Dorian turned to her, his gaze steady. Because actions have consequences, Nina. Your mother didn't just cheat. She sold classified information. She helped compromise national security. She turned you against me. A simple divorce wouldn't even come close to justice. Without warning, Valeria lunged and slapped him hard across the face. You heartless scumsucker. Dorian didn't flinch. He calmly wiped a drop of blood from his lip and looked at her with something close to pity. Goodbye, Valeria. My lawyer has my final offer. I suggest you accept it. He turned and walked out. Nina rushed after him. Dad, wait. He stopped beside his car. What is it? I didn't know, she said, her voice breaking. About the espionage, about Mom's plans. I thought it was just an affair. Just an affair? Dorian repeated, as though the words were poison. As if breaking my trust and humiliating me wasn't enough. I was wrong, she whispered, tears streaking her face. And I've lost everything because of it. My friends, my reputation, my future. Isn't that punishment enough? Dorian looked at her for a long, silent moment. No, he said finally. It's only the beginning. You made your choice, Nina. Now live with it. As Dorian drove away, Nina stood motionless in the parking lot, the bitter weight of consequences lingering on her tongue. The federal courthouse buzzed with activity as reporters and onlookers vied for space. Inside, Valeria Collins sat beside her attorney, her once flawless appearance now worn and haggard. Before her lay the plea agreement, a document that would define the rest of her life. All rise. The bailiff called as Judge Harriet Montgomery entered the courtroom. Across the aisle, the prosecution team organized their case materials, confident in their position. Among the spectators sat Dorian, composed in a charcoal suit, his face expressionless. Mrs. Collins, Judge Montgomery began. I understand you wish to change your plea? Yes, Your Honor, Valeria's lawyer replied. My client intends to plead guilty to reduced charges of conspiracy and unauthorized disclosure of classified information. The government's position? The judge asked the prosecutor. We accept the plea, Your Honor, the prosecutor replied. Given Mrs. Collins's cooperation and Mr. Collins's statement attesting to her limited understanding of the documents she provided Mr. Hamilton. Judge Montgomery glanced over her glasses at Valeria. Mrs. Collins, do you understand that by entering this plea, you are admitting guilt to these charges? I do, Your Honor, Valeria said, her voice barely above a whisper. And you are doing so freely and voluntarily, without coercion? Valeria's eyes briefly flicked to Dorian before returning to the judge. Yes, Your Honor. The proceedings continued, legal jargon washing over her like a toxic tide. The final terms, 3 years in a minimum security facility, forfeiture of assets tied to the crimes, and acceptance of Dorian's proposed divorce settlement. When the hearing ended, Valeria was allowed a few minutes with her family before being taken into custody. Nina hugged her mother tightly, tears streaming down her face. I'll come visit every weekend, she promised. Take care of yourself, Valeria whispered back. And be smarter than I was. As Valeria approached Dorian, he remained standing, stiff and distant. So this is your victory, she said softly. You've reduced me to nothing. You did that yourself, Dorian replied. I only ensured there were consequences. Will you ever forgive me? She asked, a final glimmer of their shared past in her voice. Dorian looked at her for a long moment. No, he said simply. Some betrayals can't be undone. Valeria was then led away. Parker joined his father and sister. The three Collins stood in silence until Dorian finally spoke. Parker, your leave ends tomorrow. Yes, sir. Back to West Point in the morning. Dorian nodded. Good. Stay focused. This situation won't affect your future. I've spoken with your commandant. Parker straightened. Thank you, sir. Dorian turned to Nina, who looked at him with hopeful eyes. Dad, I have a meeting, he said, cutting her off. Parker, I'll call you next week. Without another glance at Nina, he walked away, leaving her beside her brother. The message was unmistakable. Parker was forgiven. She was not. Give him time, Parker said, giving her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. Nina shook her head. You don't get it. He's not mad anymore. That would be easier. He's just done with me. That evening, Dorian sat alone in his Pentagon City apartment, watching news coverage of Valeria's plea deal. The media painted him as the sympathetic figure, the betrayed husband, the patriotic businessman who had exposed espionage. Only he knew the depth of his calculated revenge. His phone rang. It was Tobin Washington. "It's done," Tobin reported. "Blake Hamilton has been processed into federal prison. He's already receiving quite the welcome from inmates who don't take kindly to traitors," Tobin said. "And Tristan Davenport cut a deal he'll do 5 years. His father got 15. The Davenports are finished. Their stock has collapsed, and all government contracts have been canceled." Dorian gave a satisfied nod. "And Nina? Is she still at the apartment we arranged?" "Yes. She's working as a waitress at a cafe near Howard University. Quite a shift from her days as a socialite." Dorian was quiet for a moment. "Keep monitoring her. No contact. No interference." Tobin hesitated. "You're being harder on her than on Parker." "Parker never betrayed me," Dorian replied coldly. "He never looked me in the eye while helping destroy everything I built." After hanging up, Dorian walked to the window, staring out at the glittering lights of the Capitol. Phase 2 was complete. Valerius sentenced, Blake in prison, the Davenports ruined. But he wasn't finished. The final phase would be the most devastating of all. 2 weeks later, Nina returned to her cramped apartment after a double shift, her feet sore, her cafe uniform stained with coffee. She was startled to find Parker sitting outside her door in full dress uniform. "Parker, what are you doing here?" He stood, face serious. "We need to talk." Inside, as Nina made coffee, Parker paced the small living room. "Dad's selling the house," he said. "All of Mom's things are being packed up and stored until she gets out." Nina shrugged. "Not a shock. He hasn't been back since everything fell apart. That's not all. He's stepping down as CEO of Collins Defense." She froze. "What? That company is his life." "Not anymore, apparently. There's a press conference tomorrow. Word is he's taking a position at the Defense Department, something classified." Nina sank onto the worn sofa. "He's wiping the slate clean. Even getting rid of us." Parker sat beside her. "Not me," he said quietly. "He calls regularly, checks on my progress. He's even talked about getting me a post at the Pentagon after I graduate." The silence between them spoke volumes. Dorian had cut Valeria and Nina from his life, while embracing Parker. The fracture in the family was complete and permanent. "I've tried everything," Nina whispered, tears in her eyes. "Letters, calls, emails. He won't answer." "You sided with Mom," Parker said gently. "In Dad's world, loyalty is everything. So that's it. One mistake, and I'm erased from his life forever?" Parker paused, then spoke carefully. "Dad was in special operations before he started the company. He never talks about it, but I've heard things. There was an op in Kosovo. His unit was betrayed by their translator. Everyone but Dad died in an ambush." "What happened to the translator?" Nina asked, already dreading the answer. "He vanished. No body, no trace. Just disappeared." Parker met her gaze. "Dad doesn't give second chances to traitors, Nina. Not ever." The next day, Dorian Collins stood confidently at a podium, cameras flashing, as he addressed the press. After 20 years leading Collins Defense Systems, he began, "I've accepted a position as Special Advisor to the Secretary of Defense. The company will remain in trusted hands and will continue our mission to safeguard American interests both at home and abroad." A reporter called out, "Mr. Collins, how has the recent scandal involving your wife influenced this decision?" Dorian didn't flinch. "My personal circumstances are unrelated to this professional transition." Next question. "Are the rumors true that you're dating Congresswoman Diane Reynolds?" A faint smile played at Dorian's lips. "My private life will remain private. This press conference is about Collins' defense, not about me." Watching the broadcast from her apartment, Nina felt a shiver run through her. The man at the podium was unrecognizable, confident, powerful, and completely unaffected by the wreckage of their family. He had rebuilt himself like a phoenix rising from the ashes of betrayal. Her phone buzzed. A message from a blocked number lit up the screen. "Final phase begins tomorrow. Prepare yourself, D." Nina stared at the message, heart pounding. What else could he possibly have planned? Exactly 1 year to the day after the dinner that changed everything, Dorian Collins returned to the mansion. The estate had remained untouched since Valeria's imprisonment, maintained only by a minimal staff. Now, as his sleek black SUV rolled up the circular drive, the house glowed with light. Inside, Rosa coordinated a team of caterers putting the finishing touches on an elaborate dinner. Fresh floral arrangements adorned every room, and the dining table gleamed with fine china and crystal. "Perfect timing, Mr. Collins," Rosa greeted him. "Everything's ready, just as you asked." Dorian nodded, surveying the house with detached interest. "And our guests?" "Mr. Parker is already here. Miss Nina is on her way. The others will arrive at 7 as instructed." Dorian climbed the stairs to the master suite, now completely redecorated, with all traces of Valeria erased. After showering and changing into a tailored suit, he opened a secure safe and retrieved a sealed envelope. Downstairs, Parker waited in the study, observing the changes. The family photos were gone, replaced by art and military memorabilia. It was as if Valeria and Nina had never existed. "Dad," Parker greeted with a firm handshake. "The place looks different." "Necessary renovations," Dorian replied. "How was the drive from West Point?" "Fine." Nina called me in a panic. She doesn't know what this dinner is about. Dorian's face remained blank. She'll understand soon enough. The doorbell rang. Moments later, Nina entered the study. Gone was the pampered, polished girl from a year ago. She was thinner now, her demeanor cautious. Her simple but elegant outfit reflected a life of hard-earned independence. "Dad," she said softly. "Thank you for inviting me." Dorian gave a brief nod, avoiding her eyes. "Parker, give us a moment." When they were alone, Dorian gestured for her to sit. "You've been working at the cafe for a year now." "I have," she confirmed. "And I've been taking night classes, business administration." "I know," Dorian replied. "I've had you watched." Nina didn't react. "Keeping tabs on the enemy?" "Observing your decisions," he corrected. "You had easier options. Your mother's friends offered help. You turned them down." "They weren't my friends," Nina said bitterly. "They dropped me the second I stopped being useful." Dorian studied her carefully. "Why did you side with your mother, Nina? I want the truth." This time, Nina held his gaze. "Because she made me believe you didn't care. That your work, your ambitions, always came before us. And I believed her because you were distant. Always working, always focused on the company or government contracts. Mom was there, present. It was easy to believe her version of events." Dorian nodded slowly. "A careful manipulation. Valeria was always skilled at that." "I was wrong," Nina said. "I see that now. But it doesn't erase what I did." Before Dorian could respond, Rosa appeared at the doorway. "The other guests have arrived, Mr. Collins." In the formal living room, Nina was stunned to see a gathering of Washington's elite high-ranking military officers, Defense Department officials, members of Congress, and, most notably, Congresswoman Diane Reynolds, the poised silver-haired former prosecutor recently rumored to be romantically linked to Dorian. "What is this?" Nina whispered to Parker. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "But whatever Dad's planning, it's big." Dorian moved effortlessly through the crowd, commanding attention with the presence of a man entirely at home in the halls of power. Nina watched as he introduced Parker to key figures, clearly positioning him for a bright future. Dinner was executed with military efficiency, conversations centered around national security and defense policy. Seated far from her father, Nina observed how different he seemed in this environment: engaged, confident, even charismatic. He was respected and admired by everyone in the room. After dessert, Dorian rose and tapped his glass for attention. "Thank you all for being here tonight. 1 year ago, my life changed in profound ways, both personally and professionally. Many of you were instrumental in helping me navigate that transition, and I'm deeply grateful." Supportive murmurs rippled through the room. "Tonight marks a new beginning," Dorian continued. "Secretary Matt has asked me to lead a newly formed division at the Pentagon, focused on counterintelligence and the protection of defense technologies. I've accepted." Applause erupted, and Secretary Matt raised his glass in a toast. "In addition," Dorian said, glancing at Diane Reynolds, who returned the look with a warm smile, "I've decided to make some personal changes. But before we speak of the future, there's one last matter from the past to address." He signaled to Rosa, who handed him the sealed envelope he had retrieved earlier. "This envelope contains evidence that some of you have long sought concerning the espionage case involving my former wife. I believe the time has come for full transparency." Nina stiffened in her seat, bracing herself for whatever was coming. Dorian opened the envelope and removed several photographs. "These images confirm what we had suspected but could not prove until now: the involvement of foreign intelligence operatives in the theft of classified defense technologies. My ex-wife was not merely aiding her lover for personal gain, she was knowingly collaborating with agents of a hostile foreign power." Gasps and shocked murmurs swept through the room as he passed the photographs to Secretary Matt. Nina caught glimpses of Valeria in covert meetings, exchanging documents with unidentified men in secluded locations. "This is why I've accepted the new position," Dorian said firmly. "This betrayal was personal, and I'm committed to ensuring it never happens again to me or to anyone else." The conversation that followed was heavy with implications: technical, legal, political. As officials debated next steps, Nina remained motionless, stunned by the final confirmation of her mother's betrayal. Valeria hadn't just been unfaithful or greedy, she had committed treason. Later, as the guests departed and the house grew quiet, Nina stood with Dorian on the terrace. The night air was crisp, and soft lighting bathed the garden below in a gentle glow. "Were those photographs real?" she asked in a low voice. Dorian nodded. "I've had them for over a year. Why reveal them now?" Because Valeria is petitioning for early release on medical grounds, he answered. These ensure that won't happen. Nina absorbed this. You're making sure she serves every day of her sentence? Actions have consequences, Dorian said simply. She made her choices knowing the risks. And me? Nina asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Have I served my sentence? Dorian turned to look at her fully for the first time that evening. He studied her for a moment before responding. That depends on what you've learned. I've learned that nothing is more important than loyalty, she said. That actions have lasting consequences. That I can't expect forgiveness just because I'm sorry. Good lessons, Dorian acknowledged. Expensive ones. What happens now? Nina asked. Dorian considered her carefully. Now you continue on your path. Finish your education. Build your own life. Without you in it, Nina concluded. I didn't say that, Dorian replied. But our relationship will never be what it was. Too much has happened. He handed her a business card with a phone number written on the back. This is my private line. Use it if you need me. Not before. It wasn't forgiveness, not quite, but it was something. A door left slightly ajar, rather than permanently closed. As Nina drove back to her apartment that night, she realized her father's revenge had never been about destroying those who betrayed him. It had been about rebuilding himself, stronger and more powerful than before. While they were left to witness his resurrection from the ashes they had created, 2 years after the fateful dinner, Dorian Collins had fully reinvented himself. Now serving as the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Technology Security, he commanded respect in Washington's corridors of power. His relationship with Diane Reynolds had evolved into a partnership of equals, two powerful individuals who understood each other's ambitions and supported them fully. Parker had graduated from West Point with honors and now served as a lieutenant in Army intelligence, his career path clearly influenced by his father's connections and guidance. Nina had completed her business degree and secured a position with a technology startup, living modestly but independently. Valeria remained in federal prison, her appeal for early release denied after the revelation of her connections to foreign agents. Blake Hamilton had become a model prisoner, writing a memoir about his unwitting involvement in espionage, though it had been universally rejected by publishers. On a crisp autumn morning, Dorian sat in his Pentagon office, reviewing classified reports on technology theft attempts by foreign operatives. His secure phone line rang. Collins, he answered briskly. Sir, there's been an incident at FCI Danbury, the FBI liaison reported, involving Valeria Collins. Dorian's expression didn't change. What kind of incident? She attempted suicide, sir. She's in stable condition, but the prison psychologist is concerned. She's requesting to see you. Denied, Dorian replied without hesitation. Forward any relevant security information to my office. But I have no interest in personal contact. Understood, sir. There's one more thing. Before the attempt, she mailed letters to several people, including you and your daughter. They were intercepted during security screening. The contents are mostly personal, but there were references to someone named the handler, possibly her foreign contact. We're investigating. Dorian's interest sharpened. Send me copies immediately. Within the hour, Dorian was reviewing scans of Valeria's letter. Her handwriting, once elegant, had become erratic. The contents were rambling, shifting between apologies and accusations. But certain passages stood out. The handler promised we would be protected. He lied to us all. Blake doesn't know the real reason behind everything. I did it for us, Dorian. For our future. Dorian read the letter multiple times, his tactical mind processing the implications. Valeria seemed to be suggesting a deeper conspiracy, one that went beyond the affair and espionage, something Dorian himself had been investigating before her betrayal. As he continued to consider this, his assistant announced an unexpected visitor, Nina. She entered his office hesitantly, dressed professionally in a simple suit, her hair neatly pulled back. Thank you for seeing me, Dad, she said. Dorian nodded, signaling for her to sit. What brings you to the Pentagon? Mom tried to kill herself, Nina said bluntly. I thought you should know. I was informed, Dorian replied, his voice cold. FBI protocol. Nina studied her father's impassive face. Don't you care at all? My personal feelings are irrelevant, he answered. It's a security matter now. Because of the handler? Nina asked. Dorian's eyes narrowed. How do you know that term? Mom mentioned him in her letters to me over the past year. I thought it was prison paranoia, until the FBI contacted me this morning. She placed several envelopes on his desk. These are all her letters. I think you should read them. Dorian examined the stack of letters. You kept correspondence with her? She's still my mother, Nina replied simply. Despite everything, Dorian began reading the letters while Nina remained silent. As he read, a pattern began to emerge. Valeria had been dropping hints about a larger conspiracy involving something called Project Lazarus, a project Dorian had apparently been investigating before her betrayal. Did you know? Dorian asked, looking up what these references meant. Nina shook her head. I thought she was delusional, but after her suicide attempt, I started wondering if there was more to the story. Dorian leaned back, his mind racing. 3 years earlier, he had indeed been investigating irregularities surrounding a classified defense project experimental technology that was supposedly abandoned but might have continued under deep cover. His investigation had mysteriously stalled just around the time Valeria's affair had begun. Why are you bringing this to me now? He asked. Because whatever the handler is, Mom is terrified of him, Nina said. She believes he's going to silence her in prison. And if that's true, she betrayed you for reasons more complicated than we thought. Dorian's expression hardened. She betrayed me. The reason is irrelevant. What if she was threatened? What if they used her to get to you because you were investigating something they wanted hidden? That doesn't excuse her choices. Dorian's voice turned cold. Or yours. Nina met his gaze steadily. No, it doesn't. But it might explain them. She stood to leave. I'm going to visit Mom tomorrow. If you want to know what else she knows, this might be your last chance. After Nina left, Dorian called Tobin, now the chief security advisor at the Pentagon. I need you to reopen the Lazarus file, he said without preamble. And I need enhanced security for Valeria at Danbury. Discreetly. Lazarus? Tobin sounded surprised. That's ancient history. What's happened is possibly nothing. Possibly everything. Just do it. The next morning, Dorian surprised Nina by meeting her outside FCI Danbury. I'll give her 15 minutes, he said. No more. Valeria Collins barely resembled the elegant socialite who had once dominated Washington's charity scene. Prison had aged her, and the suicide attempt had left her physically weakened. When Dorian entered her hospital room, her eyes widened in disbelief. Dorian, she rasped, her voice hoarse. He didn't soften. You came. Not for you, he clarified. For information. Valeria nodded weakly. The handler. You found my messages, she said, her voice cracking. Who is he? Dorian demanded. I never knew his real name. Valeria began, her voice strained. He approached me 3 years ago at the winter charity auction. Charming, sophisticated. He knew everything about us, our marriage problems, your work, your investigation into Lazarus. Go on, Dorian prompted when she hesitated. He said you were digging into something dangerous, something powerful people wanted to stop. He offered me a choice. Help distract you with a personal crisis, or they'd eliminate you permanently. So, you started an affair to distract me? Dorian's voice was skeptical. It wasn't supposed to be real, Valeria insisted. Blake was recruited, too. He didn't know the full story, just that he needed to get close to me. But then, she trailed off, her voice faltering. You fell for him, Dorian finished, his tone flat, and decided to steal from me as well. Valeria closed her eyes, a long pause filling the room. Yes, the handler kept demanding more documents, access codes. When I resisted, he threatened Nina. Dorian glanced at his daughter, who stood silently by the door, her face pale. Why didn't you come to me? He asked. Valeria's voice was bitter. Would you have believed me? We were already distant, and they had evidence of the initial meetings that made me look guilty. Convenient story, Dorian remarked. What's your proof? Valeria gestured weakly to the bedside table. Third drawer. Inside my Bible. Nina retrieved the book and found a small data chip hidden in the hollowed-out pages. Audio recordings, Valeria explained. I started making them after the first year. Insurance policy. Dorian pocketed the chip without comment. If this is manipulation, I'm already in prison, Valeria said quietly. What more can you do to me? The handler is real. And if you've reopened Lazarus, you're in danger again. Dorian stood to leave. I'll investigate your claims. That's all I can promise. Dorian, Valeria called, as he reached the door. I did betray you. That part was real, and I'm sorry. He paused, but didn't turn around. Goodbye, Valeria. Outside, Nina hurried to keep up with her father's purposeful stride. Do you believe her? Partially, Dorian admitted. The Lazarus Project was real, and my investigation did hit unexpected roadblocks. The timing matches. What now? Dorian stopped at his car. Now I find out if the handler exists. And if he does, I deal with him my way. Back in Washington, Dorian sequestered himself in a secure room at the Pentagon with Tobin, analyzing the audio recordings from Valeria's chip. The voice of the handler was disguised, but the content was unmistakable threats, coercion, specific demands for information related to Dorian's work. It could be staged, Tobin suggested, playing devil's advocate. It could, Dorian agreed. But combined with what we know about the Lazarus Project's mysterious cancellation, you think she was telling the truth about being coerced? Dorian's expression was conflicted. Partially coerced, at first, perhaps, but she made her choices. She could have come to me, to the authorities. So what's your play here? Tobin asked. Dorian's eyes hardened. We find the handler. We uncover whatever they were hiding in Lazarus. And then Then I finish what I started 3 years ago, before I was distracted by personal betrayals. For the first time in 3 years, Dorian Collins wasn't focused on punishing those who had betrayed him. He was hunting the puppet master who had helped orchestrate his family's destruction. And the threat was about to learn exactly who they had underestimated. 6 months after Valeria's suicide attempt, Dorian Collins stood at the window of his Pentagon office, watching the early morning light illuminate the Washington Monument in the distance. On his desk lay the complete file on the handler, the result of an intensive covert investigation. The man's true identity was Mason Vance, a former intelligence operative turned private contractor for a shadowy consortium of defense industry players. His specialty was compromising individuals with access to classified information, often through elaborate personal entrapments. Valeria had merely been one of his targets, with Blake Hamilton another pawn in his game. A knock at the door interrupted Dorian's thoughts. "Come in," he called without turning. Diane Reynolds entered, looking polished as always in a tailored suit. "The president's security briefing has been moved to 11, she informed him. Dorian nodded. "Thank you for letting me know." Diane hesitated before speaking again. "You seem distracted lately. Is it the Lazarus investigation?" "Among other things," Dorian admitted. "The pieces are finally coming together. Is there anything I can do to help?" she asked, moving closer. Dorian turned to face her, studying her carefully. "Actually, there is. You have access to the congressional oversight records on abandoned defense projects, don't you?" "Of course," Diane replied. "Why?" "I need everything on Project Lazarus, especially the original termination order and who authorized it." Diane's smile faltered slightly. "That's highly classified, Dorian. Even with your clearance, there would be questions." "You can access it without raising flags," Dorian pressed. "Given your position on the Intelligence Committee, I'll see what I can do," she promised, kissing him briefly before departing. Once alone, Dorian made a secure call. "She took the bait," he told Tobin. "Exactly as predicted." "You sure it's her?" Tobin asked. "The timing fits," Dorian replied. "She was on the Intelligence Committee when Lazarus was shut down. She pursued our relationship immediately after Valeria's arrest, and she's been subtly monitoring all my investigations since." "Risky game you're playing," Tobin warned. "No riskier than being manipulated for 3 years," Dorian said coldly. "Tonight, we confirm everything. Be ready." Later that evening, Dorian hosted a small dinner party at his Georgetown townhouse. The guests included key Pentagon officials, select members of Congress, and, of course, Diane. Throughout the evening, Dorian played the attentive host while Tobin conducted a sophisticated electronic sweep of the house, discovering exactly what they had suspected: advanced surveillance devices in Dorian's study, bedroom, and even his secure phone. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Dorian led Diane to his study, where he unlocked a hidden wall safe. "I want to show you something," he said, pulling out a thick file labeled Lazarus Complete Findings. Diane's interest was immediate but carefully controlled. "I thought you were still investigating." "The official investigation continues," Dorian clarified. "But I've been conducting my own private inquiry. What I found is disturbing." He placed the file on his desk, but didn't open it. "First, though, I'd like a drink. Would you care for one?" "Bourbon. Neat," Diane replied, her eyes never leaving the file. Dorian walked to the bar cart, deliberately turning his back as he prepared their drinks. As expected, when he glanced in the mirror, he saw Diane quickly photographing several pages of the file with a miniature camera disguised as a pen. "Here we are," Dorian said, turning back with their drinks. "To truth," finally revealed. Diane smiled and clinked her glass against his. "To truth." They both drank, and Dorian launched into a detailed explanation of his Lazarus findings, carefully fabricated information designed to mislead Diane. She listened attentively, asking occasional questions that revealed her extensive knowledge of a project she should have known little about. "It's getting late," Dorian eventually said, closing the file. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion tomorrow." "Of course," Diane agreed. "May I use your bathroom before I leave?" While she was gone, Dorian sent a prearranged text to Tobin. "Eagle has landed." When Diane returned, her demeanor remained unchanged, but Dorian knew she had transmitted the photographs and documents to her handler. The trap was set. "I'll call you tomorrow," she said, kissing him goodnight. After she left, Dorian waited precisely 30 minutes before making his move. The tracking device Tobin had planted on Diane's car showed she hadn't gone home, but had instead driven to an office building in Alexandria, one owned by a shell company linked to Mason Vance. Against Tobin's advice, Dorian drove there alone, parking 2 blocks away and approaching on foot. Years of special operations training returned instinctively as he bypassed security and entered the building undetected. On the 3rd floor, voices echoed from a conference room. Dorian moved silently closer, his phone recording everything. feeding him false information for months. Diane was saying, he suspects nothing. These new Lazarus findings change everything, replied a male voice, undoubtedly Mason Vance. If Collins has connected our operation to the Chinese military contracts. He hasn't confirmed anything, Diane insisted. This is all theoretical. We can't take chances, Vance declared. The original plan stands. Collins has to be eliminated before his report reaches the secretary. That won't be necessary, Dorian said calmly, stepping into the doorway. The secretary already has my full report, including this conversation. Vance and Diane froze, along with two other men in the room. Dorian held up his phone, live streaming to the Pentagon security office. Your building is currently being surrounded by federal agents. Vance recovered first, reaching for a weapon, but Dorian moved with the lethal efficiency of his special forces days, disarming him with a precise strike that left Vance gasping on the floor. Diane stared at Dorian, her composure finally shattered. Dorian, please, I can explain. Save it for your interrogation. Dorian cut her off. 3 years of manipulation, using Valeria and Blake to distract me from discovering your weapons technology sales to hostile nations. Orchestrating the destruction of my family to protect your operation. It was just business, Vance wheezed from the floor. Nothing personal. Dorian looked down at him with cold contempt. You made it personal when you targeted my family. That was your mistake. Within minutes, federal agents stormed the building, arresting Vance, Diane, and their associates. As they were led away, Diane made one last plea. Dorian, we had something real, she insisted. It wasn't all a lie. Dorian regarded her impassively. Everything with you was a lie. The difference is I knew it from the beginning. In the aftermath, the full scope of the conspiracy was revealed. Mason Vance had been running an elaborate operation, selling classified weapons technology to foreign powers and using Diane's position on the Intelligence Committee to protect their activities. When Dorian's investigation into Project Lazarus threatened to expose them, they orchestrated Valeria's affair and the subsequent espionage scandal to discredit and distract him. 1 week after the arrests, Dorian visited Valeria in prison. She looked slightly better than during her hospital stay, but was still a shadow of her former self. You were right about the handler, Dorian acknowledged. Vance has been arrested, along with his entire network, including Diane Reynolds. Valeria's eyes widened. Your girlfriend? She was part of it? She was Vance's partner from the beginning, Dorian confirmed. Sent to monitor me after your arrest. And you knew I suspected after reading your letters, he added. I confirmed it 6 months ago and have been building a case since then, Dorian said. Valeria absorbed the information. So, I was manipulated into betraying you, and then you were manipulated into a relationship with another traitor. There's some irony in that. Dorian didn't smile. Manipulation doesn't absolve choice. Vance may have targeted you, but you chose to continue the affair, steal from me, and turn our daughter against me. You could have come to me at any point. I know, Valeria admitted. I made my choices. I'm paying for them. Dorian stood to leave. Your cooperation in the Vance investigation will be noted in your record. It might help with a future parole hearing. Dorian, Valeria called as he reached the door. Does this change anything between us? He paused. No, he said finally. Some bridges can't be rebuilt once they're burned. When Dorian returned to Washington, he found Nina waiting in his office, granted access by Tobin. The past year had transformed their relationship from complete estrangement to a cautious, formal reconnection, professional, but distant. I heard about Diane and the handler, she said. It's all over the Pentagon. Dorian nodded. Justice finally served. And Mom? She asked. Did you see her? Yes. She confirmed what we suspected about the initial manipulation, but it doesn't change the choices she made afterward. Nina studied her father. Does it change how you feel about what happened? Dorian considered the question carefully. It contextualizes it. Doesn't excuse it. And me? Nina asked, the question she had been working toward for over a year. Does knowing I was manipulated by both Mom and Tristan change how you feel about my betrayal? Dorian met his daughter's gaze directly. You chose your side. You had opportunities to come to me with your concerns, to question what was happening. You didn't. I know, she acknowledged. And I've accepted the consequences. I've built a new life without your help. Proven I can stand on my own. Yes, you have, Dorian agreed. That counts for something. A pregnant silence filled the room before Nina spoke again. Parker is being deployed next month. He suggested a family dinner before he leaves. Just the 3 of us. Dorian's expression remained blank. When? Saturday at my apartment. Nothing fancy. Dorian nodded once. I'll be there. It wasn't forgiveness. Dorian Collins did not forgive betrayal, not even from his daughter. But it was acknowledgement. Recognition that she had faced her consequences and emerged stronger. That was all he could offer. 3 days later, Dorian attended the sentencing of Mason Vance and Diane Reynolds. Both received lengthy prison terms for espionage and conspiracy. As they were led from the courtroom, Diane caught Dorian's eye one last time, searching for any hint of the emotion she thought they shared. She found none. Dorian Collins watched passively as the architects of his family's destruction were led away in chains. He had rebuilt himself from the ashes they had created, emerging more powerful than before. That evening, he sat alone in his study, reviewing the final report on the Lazarus investigation. The conspiracy had been completely dismantled, the stolen technology recovered, and the traitors imprisoned. Justice had been served. A knock at the door revealed Parker in his dress uniform, ready for deployment. "Sir," he greeted his father formally. "I wanted to stop by before leaving." "Come in," Dorian invited, pouring 2 glasses of bourbon. "To your first deployment." They drank in comfortable silence before Parker spoke again. "I saw the Van Cest sentencing on the news. Quite the takedown." "Justice delayed," Dorian replied, but not denied. "And Nina's dinner this weekend? Will you really come?" Dorian nodded. "I said I would." Parker studied his father. "She's worked hard to rebuild herself. Not unlike you." "Perhaps," Dorian acknowledged. "But trust, once broken, is not easily restored." "No," Parker agreed. "But family is still family, even with its scars." As Parker left for his deployment, Dorian stood on the steps of his Georgetown townhouse, watching his son drive away. The son who had never betrayed him. The son who still believed in family, despite its fractures. Dorian Collins had lost a wife, nearly lost a daughter, and exposed traitors at the highest levels of government. He had been betrayed, manipulated, and targeted. And through it all, he had remained true to his core principle: loyalty above all, and consequences for those who violated it. He would attend Nina's dinner. He would maintain the professional distance he had established. But he would never again trust as completely as he once had. The man who had clinked his fork against his glass that fateful night and uttered 3 sentences that changed everything had transformed completely. Dorian Collins had not merely survived betrayal. He had transcended it, forging himself into something harder, colder, and ultimately more powerful, not through forgiveness, but through the absolute and unflinching delivery of consequences to those who had wronged him. Some men might have chosen forgiveness. Dorian Collins had chosen justice instead, cold, precise, and complete. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.